So today we are gonna compare the iPhone XR versus the OnePlus 6T. Both of these phones are the budget options, and I know that 750 is a lot, but according to Apple, this is their budget phone. So let's see how these budget phones compare to each other. So this is the low light test, and we are in a city with a bunch of city lights. So this is how it will look like, and we are recording in 1080p. On the back, we will be shooting in 4K 30 and 4K 60. So let's move on. So I'm going to start off with the portrait mode, and the first thing I've noticed is the shadows. The shadows are a bit more crushed on the OnePlus 6T. We all know the iPhone is a bit more flat, so that is expected. For the background blur, I do find that the iPhone XR does produce a little bit more, and you can adjust it after. For the 6T, I couldn't find an option, so if you do know, comment down below. The highlights in portrait mode for the 6T is a bit more stronger, as I can tell here that the sky is really overblown. It is much more white, and the XR can see the blue in the sky. One huge advantage of the OnePlus is you can actually take portrait mode pictures of objects, whereas the iPhone XR you cannot do that. You really need a face for the portrait mode to activate, while the OnePlus 6T you can do with anything, even a human subject without a face. You can still get some background blur of objects if you bring it up close to the camera lens, but that's the same as every other phone there is. It's just less convenient to do, so if you want background blur with objects, then the XR isn't the one for you. Now moving to the front of the camera, it's still the same thing. The highlights are still pretty much overpowering, and the shadows, it's still a bit more crushed on the 6T. There's a lot more background blur going on the XR, and if you notice on the face, it is much more clear, and a lot of the things become a lot more softer, even my jacket. Now for the 6T, the whole cutout is my whole body, so that whole section right there is in focus while the background is out of focus. For the high dynamic range, both of these are really good, but I do like the XR a little bit more. I can see some more details in the shadows, while the OnePlus is much more contrasty than the XR. For the highlights, I do find the XR much more controlled than the OnePlus. As you can tell here, for the background on the 6T, it's really hard to tell what's behind it. It's really overblown, and on the XR, you can tell that there's windows behind it, and you can still see the blue sky reflection off that window. And now for the colors, I do find that the XR is a bit more consistent overall, while even if you look at the past pictures with the portrait mode and portrait mode of other objects, the 6T is really different. Sometimes it's more blue, sometimes it's more flat, sometimes it's more green. So I do find that the color balance or the white balance on the 6T is really inconsistent. For the XR, I always know that it's a flat look, but it's slightly to the warmer side. Now when I took pictures without the sun or when I'm indoors, I do find that the 6T a lot more consistent. It's always going to be that neutral flat look, while the XR, it's still going to be that flat warmish look. So being consistent all the time is going to be a huge plus for me. Now moving on to low light, again, XR is flat. And you can tell by the left side, the shadows is all, you can still see the shadows. The bricks, you can see all of it. On the 6T, you can still see it, you can still make it out, but it's so much darker. So if you really want that dramatic look, the 6T got it right off the bat. So a lot of the dark shots here you're gonna see is pretty much the same. The 6T is a lot more contrasty, the blacks are darker, and on the XR, it's a lot more flat. So you can still see a lot more things when they're flat, but I do notice that there are some greenish hue on their pictures. So some people may not like that greenish hue, and the 6T does represent a little bit more closer to the eye. Now going over night mode on the 6T versus no night mode on the XR. So when you're in a dark alleyway with at least some sort of street light that's far away, I do notice that the difference in night mode isn't the biggest. The overall picture, it is brighter, but I do find that the color shifts a little bit, so it may look a bit awkward. So is it worth holding your phone for like 4 seconds just to take that extra bit of brightness on your pictures? That's really up to you. Now how about an area where there's little to no lighting at all? I gotta say my experience with the OnePlus 6T is really horrible. I really don't like my experience with the night mode on this camera. Now here's why. In really dark situations, it always tries to find the focus point and then it keeps refocusing. So when I press the shutter button, it takes a picture of an unfocused picture. Now the second thing is you have to hold your hand really still. If not, even the slightest movement, it makes your whole picture even more blurry. Now taking it side by side in real time and now seeing it on the screen side by side, I don't really see a huge difference. Yes, the colors are different and the clarity might be different, but I just don't, my experience with it isn't worth taking multiple pictures of the same guy, having him stand there for like
10-20 seconds, whereas the iPhone XR, I just snap a picture and we're good. Now that's not going to be a huge problem for a lot of people because they're not going to be in that really dark situation. A lot of times they're going to be out in a city with a lot of city lights, so auto mode is already good enough to use in that environment. So for video, the stabilization test is really close to each other. I can't tell which one is better, so let me know which one you guys think is better down below. For the colors, I do think the iPhone XR is leaning towards the warmer side as expected, and the 6T is leaning closer to the greenish side. Now the color shift is really slight and you really have to look for it, but that's the difference that I've seen here. Shooting in 4K 60, they don't have any stabilization on both of these phones. One thing I do like about the 6T is that it keeps the sun really maintained. You can tell that the clouds is a lot more textured, whereas the XR is just a huge blob of white. The field of view on the XR is a lot more wider than the 6T, so when you're trying to do a lot of like the background blur, 6T is a lot more easier to do, whereas the iPhone XR you really have to get close up to get at least some sort of background blur. For low light stabilization, I would go with the XR. Even though the OnePlus is a lot more stabilized, it's not as clear as the XR. So I think that if the XR is trying to work as hard as the 6T, it's gonna look the same as the 6T. So it really depends on what you like, either more stabilized with a more jittery look or less stabilized with a less jittery look. 4K 60, the first thing I've noticed is how much darker and contrastier the 6T looks compared to the XR. Other than that, everything looks the same to me. The smoothness, the clarity, so it's mainly the colors that's different. Now shooting in a really dark situation, I do like the colors on XR much better than a 6T, because on a 6T it looks like there's some sort of blue filter going on the whole image. Even if you compare it to this background, black background, the XR blends a lot more in, whereas the 6T you can see the whole border around it. It looks really weird. So that is my comparison between the iPhone XR and the OnePlus 6T. I do think the 6T is really good. The camera is really good for what you're paying for. My biggest issue with the 6T is the inconsistency of the white balance, so I don't really know what color I'm going to get on my images, and I don't really like the night mode on the 6T. After using LG's, Google's, and Huawei's night mode, I'm really not having a good experience with the OnePlus. But a lot of people may not use that, and the colors, it shifts around, so, and you can edit them after. But what I think is, again, the OnePlus 6T is a really good camera for its value. So thanks for watching. I know this is a long one, and I'll see you guys later.